let's just start with the president's speech, and we'll give the audience a little flavor for how it sounded. The overall feeling of it was he wanted to tie Israel to Ukraine. It's the same thing. You got to fund them both. We're fighting the same kind of battle in both places, and therefore I need $105 billion. I mean, it's remarkable. It's breathtaking in its scope, given how in debt we are. And Ukraine's popularity is going down in terms of U.S. funding, but the support for Israel is very high. So there's a question about whether that was a smart move. I mean, may help the Ukrainians. I don't know how those who are in favor of Israel and backing it feel about the linkage. Having heard that, here's just a bit of him trying to tie the two together in SOT 1.
You know, the assault on Israel echoes nearly 20 months of war, tragedy, and brutality inflicted on the people of Ukraine. We've not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel. Meanwhile, Putin denies Ukraine has or ever had real statehood. To put all that at risk, if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it.
Okay, I have got to be honest. I was like, what? Who? What are we doing? Like, I'm a linear thinker. I like one strain, take me through it, make the case for Israel, then you can make the case. It was back and forth. I'm like, who are we on now? Who needs it? In any event, that's how it went for the entire time. I'll start with you, Dave. What did you make of his attempt to weave the thread?
Well, look, I mean, he's not entirely wrong to the extent that there is a connection between the two, right? You have Russia, Iran, and China forming this sort of axis, and these things are certainly related. But I agree with you that to so blatantly tie, the obscene massacre that we saw in Israel to Ukraine funding, which is a very different kind of conflict, I think people saw through it. I mean, we know that he's going to be sending this funding package to Congress that's going to include both. And so I think, as with most of the things that Biden does, there was no subtlety. It came across as cynical. And while I thought the speech as a whole was all right, I agree with you. That was the big takeaway. And it is going to be frustrating for Israel supporters to have Ukraine on their back.
What did you think of it, Noah?
I basically agree with some of what you said here. I mean, I think that there's a big similarity between the two, and then there's a big difference. And I think the big difference is that the Hamas attack on Israel and the general Iranian campaign in the Middle East is genocidal in nature. I mean, the goal of this is to wipe out the Jewish state, and if they can, the Jewish people. And so that is a sort of just a different type of effort by the Iranians than what Putin is doing in Ukraine, where his goal is territorial. He wants to control Ukraine. He wants to intimidate Europe. He wants to challenge NATO. And so I think the stakes for Israel, not to diminish in any way, if you're a Ukrainian, how horrifying this is to have your country invaded and children abducted and all of these things. But Putin's goal is not to carry out a mass genocide of Ukrainians, whereas that is clearly the goal of Hamas, the goal of Hezbollah, the goal of Iran, the goal of the Houthis, and all of these other Iranian proxies that they've built up. But the problem for Biden is that, he's incapable of persuasion. It's incredible that, we're now well over a year into U.S. support for the Ukraine war, which I generally support, by the way. I think the United States needs to uphold its, role as a global power. But the president has to make that case to the American people. And I think one of the major reasons for the skepticism that a lot of people have is that he doesn't make a case of what our interests are, why we're doing this, why this is important, why this is money well spent. And so, part of the problem is the messenger. It's also, he didn't mention Iran in his speech. And that's been a continuing problem in this, is that he never mentions the Iran word, when that is actually the problem in the Middle East. And if you're not willing to kind of say who your enemy is, it's a dangerous sign, because your enemy sees that you're scared and that you may not be willing to do what's necessary. And so Although I think some of the tactics are good here, I think it is good to make sure the U.S., make sure Israel has the weapons it needs right now. For the president not to be able to identify who the threat is here is a big problem.
And, there was a passing reference to the hostages, but what is with the ignoring of the hostages? This just feels bizarre to me at this point. I mean, what did we just pay? Like $1 billion per hostage in our deal with Iran to retrieve those 6 Americans? And now we've got how many over there? We don't know. 14, 17, I'm not sure what the number is. Not to mention the nearly 30 dead Americans in Israel. And it's like, I saw last night there was a passing reference. We're pursuing every avenue to try to bring the loved ones up. What? Like maybe he's got some deal going behind the scenes. He was going to pull it together when he had this meeting with the Arab leaders that they all canceled on after the hospital situation. But I don't know. For me, Dave, I'm used to, in these kinds of situations, an American president coming out, showing the strength and robust nature of the American president, the American military, saying something to the effect of, if you touch one hair on the heads of those Americans, you will feel the full force and effect of the American military sitting on those 2 aircraft carriers sitting in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's baffling. It's Biden's take on all of this, and as Noah said, this unwillingness to call out Iran, it makes absolutely no sense. And you're right. I mean, we've lived through hostage situations before. And I mean, just the fact that we don't know how many there are, right? We don't know who they are. We're not hearing those stories. Biden and the Democrats really want this to all just be okay, right? And I think the left in general is looking at this and being like, well, there must be some good solution. Guess what? There isn't always a good solution. When anti-Semitic maniacs murder 260 people at a rave, right? They're the ones who did this, and there isn't some great way to tie this up where nobody in Gaza will get killed and nobody in Israel will get killed and we'll get the hostages back. No, this is war. This is war that Iran and Hamas caused. And you're absolutely right. Our commander in chief, who's getting ghosted, like he's on a dating app. It's completely and utterly unacceptable. And we need to see some fire in the belly. I haven't seen that from Tony Blinken. I haven't seen that from Jake Sullivan. They're acting like this is a G20 meeting. It's absolutely insane, Megyn.
Noah, I know you've been calling attention to this. You first thought, okay, I like the original statement Mr. Biden did on Israel, and he sent Blinken right over there. Okay. But now it appears more and more that Blinken, instead of working to pave the way for Israel to do what it must do, is trying to put up roadblocks for Israel to do what it must do.
Yeah, and this is all part of the big problem here, which is that this is an administration that for 3 years now has been pursuing this Iran policy of essentially appeasing Iran, continuing the Obama policy, trying to get back in the nuclear deal, operating under the idea that if the United States is just nice to Iran, they will be a responsible actor in the region. That whole policy has just blown up sky high. It is the most conspicuous failure of U.S. foreign policy, probably since the Iraq War. And everything that's going on in the Middle East right now is being orchestrated by the Iranians. The Houthis firing missiles, cruise missiles, the Shia militias.
Maybe at our aircraft carriers, by the way. That happened
maybe at our aircraft carriers.
Maybe right at us.
Right. And so, but with Biden, just to get to this point of everything gets thought, all of the strategy works backwards from the appease Iran goal, right? So the reason they can't actually say anything intelligent about the hostages or do anything about the hostages when there's all sorts of things we could do. Hamas is controlled by Iran. If Iran felt an actual threat from the American president and the American military, they would call up Hamas and say, you need to let those people out. And it would happen immediately because the Iranians are actually terrified of our military. And they know Iran has no real conventional military. They have no air force. They have no real standing army. We could devastate them in 45 minutes of airstrikes, and they know it. And all it takes is an American president to make a credible threat. The American president could say to them, in a way the Israelis can't, you have to let all these people out, or it's rub-a-dub-dub time for you.
Freelance work is booming. So many people are taking the leap and starting their own business, but how do you maximize your earnings and minimize your taxes and make sure you are legally compliant? It can be overwhelming, confusing, and it takes time away from your own billable hours. That's where the experts at Collective.com come in. Collective was built specifically for businesses of one that are making over $60,000 in profit a year. Collective handles all of your back office work so you can focus on your passion and not your paperwork. And they can tell you how they can backdate your S-Corp and save you thousands on taxes this year. They handle business formation, compliance paperwork, taxes, bookkeeping, accounting, even payroll. Check out collective.com/Megyn before October 31st to potentially save thousands of bucks on your 2023 taxes. Yes, 2023 taxes. To sweeten the deal, they will also throw in an extra $100 off when you use my link. But you got to do it before Halloween. That's collective.com/Megyn to get started with your personal team of self-employed tax experts. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.